So the shaila we're going to discuss today is, they say the joke that if you go to get a shtibel on Shabbos and where the get and Rebbes are, you'll find once the Rebbe leaves, because it's so crowded and so pushy, you'll find on the bottom loads of buttons that fell off kapatas. So let's discuss. We're learning Siman Shin Ches. Let's discuss the gather of a button on Shabbos. Is a button muktzah? If a button falls off, or a button that's not on yet, because you'll definitely hear people say, "Oh, the button fell, you can't move it." What is the gather of a button? That why it should be muktzah? What is it? What is a button? Number one. Number two. Before you talk about a button falling off, if it's a shaila of muktzah, there's a whole different discussion about a button on Shabbos, and that is, a lot of shirts or a lot of suits have extra buttons sewed onto it. That's a parsha for itself. Are you allowed to walk outside? Is it considered carrying excessive extra stuff when you have a extra button that's not needed to hold up your shirt, hold up your pants? That's a shaila for itself. But I'm going to discuss today mitzad muktzah. What is the din of a button on Shabbos? Now, let's start from the beginning. A button that was never used, yet it did not become part of the beged. What kind of geder is that? Because as you learn Hilchas Muktzah, there's Klisha Malachti Lisser, there's Klisha Malachti Letter, and then there's non-keli thing. Something that's not a keli. Sand, stones, money, those are not kalim. And the second that you take them out of the realm of kalim, it's much harder to allow them to be moved on Shabbos. So what's the gather of a muktzah? So in the Ktsois HaShulchan, Reb Chaim Noah, on this Siman Shin Ches says that a brand new button is for sure muktzah machmas iser. And the only way you're allowed to use it, it's a klisha malachte le'iser. He brings both opinions. The Reb Chaim Noah says it has a din of a klisha malachte le'iser, and the only way you're allowed to move a button is if it's tzarich gufay mekaymay, which, in other words, where if you need the place where the button is, or you're using the button just to hide the button, that you shouldn't lose it, you should be able to find it later on. According to Reb Chaim Noah, you wouldn't be able to do that to a new button. In the Sefer Minchas Shabbos, which is a sefer a lot about Hilchas Muktzah, he says maybe it's even worse than a Klisha Malachti Lisser, because at this point, a button doesn't have a Toras Kli on it. It might be a din of a Muktzah Machmas Gufay, which is even more difficult to move around. But the bottom line is, this is the halacha about a brand new button that wasn't used. How about a button that was attached to your kapata, attached to your suit, and because it just snapped on Shabbos and it fell off? So let me go a step earlier. Snapping on Shabbos is one thing. How about it fell off before Shabbos? So this, again, in the Sefer Minchas Shabbos, he says if the button fell off before Shabbos, you're allowed to carry it. Because once it was already attached to the beged, since before Shabbos it was attached to the beged, once it's attached to the beged, it has a shein keli on it. So even though it falls off and now it becomes nothing, a piece of nothing, and it becomes part of the discussion of a keli that dismantles, a house, windows that dismantle, and all these different questions, a delis that with the Shulchan Aruch talks about things that are dismantled and now they're not part of what it's supposed to be. If you're allowed to carry it, it depends if at any time it had a Toras Kli on it. Now by a keli, we know for what reasons you're allowed to carry it. So the Torah Minchas Shabbos writes that because it was already sewn onto a beged before, even though it snapped off and now it's not Toras Keli, still it became, once it got labeled Keli, it stays a label of Keli. And therefore, it's mutter betiltul. However, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and it's mentioned in Shmir Shabbos Kol Chasa, Perek Tezvav, and Hara Reish Chav Beit, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says that I'm concerned moving a button, even though the button fell off before Shabbos, because there is a shita of the Meiri. The Meiri in Masechta Shabbos holds that the whole heter, why you're allowed to move around doors. There's discussion, a door that fell off the hinges on Shabbos, when it was, or a door that fell off a box, a keli on Shabbos. So because it was, the discussion is, when it was attached, it was used as a keli. Now it's dismantled, it doesn't have that Torah anymore. Maybe it shouldn't be mutter to carry. So the Meiri says, the only reason I'm allowed to move, bimetaltel, dismantle door, because even though it's not going to be used now for the original same purpose, but it's still usable now for something. Because it's still usable now for something, then that's why you're allowed to use it and move it on Shabbos. It's mutter b'tiltu. Very good. That's why there's wiggle room for a door that dismantled. But over here we're talking about a button. A button has one purpose, to close the shirt, to close the kapata. And when the button snaps and the button falls off, there is no purpose for the button. So l'cha'era, if there is no another usage for the button, if it's not connected, if it's not tied, sewn onto the baggage, it's a muktzah, and it's a high level of muktzah, that it's a muktzah machmas gufay, that there's no way you should be able to move it. However, there is another svara, and the other svara is brought from Reb Chaim Na in the Ktsos HaShulchan Siman Kuf Tes. He says that look at the difference between a dallas, it's a dallas that dismantles, a door that dismantles, and the button that snaps, it doesn't really make sense that because the button fell off, it's not usable anymore. It is usable. It's usable by a door, because everything is fit to size. This door has to fit specifically this keli. So if you have the keli, and then you could you could put it back, then it's usable. By a button, because the button you could interchange, you can say again. If it doesn't fit here, I'll put it over there. So because the kaftar, this is what he uses. Pashut umatzu she'ein bedaktigen lahachzir dafke la'isa kaftar shenifsak. You're not concerned that dafke using this button goes back on this shirt and this kapata. You'll use a different button. So because you don't necessarily need dafke this button, the button that fell off has a din of muktzah. Only if it's a specialty button that fits into special kapatas that you need this kappa button, and that's the one that snapped, only then the din of a muktzah will not apply. So it's just a dugma of a simple thing. A button on Shabbos, if you're allowed to move it, it seems to be a big problem. Either it is a kalisha malachte le'isser, but just to move it around is definitely not something that's easily done.